Greetings, friends. I came across this video, How Far is the Edge of the Universe? By a channel called Fermilab. Haven't seen the channel before. Just gonna do a reaction video here. I have not seen more than a minute of this video, so let's have a look.
Asking how big the universe is seems like a silly question. I mean, it's big, really big. How big, you might ask? Oh, I don't know. There's probably a your mama joke in there somewhere. But suffice it to say that it's ginormous. But ginormous isn't really a scientific term, although it should be. So seriously now, how big is the universe? Well, the first thing you need to realize is that many people misunderstand exactly what that question is asking. We first need to distinguish between the entire universe and the universe visible from Earth. Those are different things. So how much of the universe can we see from our vantage point here on Earth? Well, light has a finite speed, specifically about 300,000 kilometers per second, or about 186,000 miles per second, which means that when you see an astronomical object,
Light has a speed of 186,000 miles per second. Did I catch that correctly? A vast abstract claim that we just have to take for granted because I guess that's what the expert class tells us. I mean, maybe it's true, we can't go out into what they say is space and be there to somehow receive the light and say, yes, I received it. And
which means that when you see an astronomical object, you're seeing it like it was in the past.
You're seeing things in the past. That's a huge claim. Maybe it's true. That's astounding. You're looking into the past. Based on this idea of how fast light travels, that I can't see how we can verify that in an ultimate sense. People claim that they can prove it, but in what manner do they really claim to know these things? Can we really know this? It depends on what your standard is for certain knowledge. For me, I'm just much more skeptical.
For instance, it takes light from the sun 8 minutes to get to the Earth. You probably knew that.
It takes light 8 minutes to get from the sun to the Earth. You probably knew that. It's like they're throwing in a little cue that don't you want to repeat what we tell you? Don't you want to get the knowledge points? Don't you want to get the points? You do want some points, right? Because you already knew that, because you remember that we told you that. You already knew that. You remembered this statistical thing that we taught you. You remember this number. You remember this figure of this concept which we came up with that we taught you, whether it's true or not.
But that has bigger implications. For instance, that means that there is a sphere around the Earth with a radius of the Earth-Sun distance where light takes 8 minutes to travel to us. And that sphere idea is true in general. There is a sphere around the Earth with a radius of a light year. If we could somehow send lots of...
So this is already another presupposition here is taking for granted infinite outer space in the way that they presented this cold, vast space of mostly empty and cold and inhospitable and separated by vast distances, incomprehensible distances. Maybe some version of that is true. I don't know, but we are just supposed to take that for granted here. And then they start reasoning based on that okay, there's this sphere around the sun. I mean, is that really the way the solar system is? Or is maybe the Earth is at the center of the solar system? Maybe things go around the Earth. Is there, and then people would, debate the shape of the Earth and all that, but I mean, you can have something above the Earth, which we call the heavens. I don't know what those things are. I have a friend who believes that all the stars are angels. I think in a sense that's what he said, and they vibrate, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe some aspect of that could in some sense be true. That's not the the conclusion I draw. I just don't know. I mean, we're interpreting patterns of light in the sky, and in that regard, we're no different than the ancients. And we've just drawn different conclusions from the ancients of what these things are. But we can't go there. We cannot go. I mean, regardless of what you believe of the moon landing, we can't go to these places and actually experiment on anything. And this guy, by the way, he's wearing an Einstein face on his t-shirt. And Einstein was a theoretical physicist. He wasn't an experimental physicist. So he just did speculative mathematics and came up with all these abstract theories, or not even real theories, but just these speculations which fed into other speculations. And Einstein's favorite theory, or famous theory, was E equals mc squared, which is energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, I believe. Yes, and on the most basic level, this equation says that energy and mass, or matter, are interchangeable, so they are essentially the same thing, which is, to me, alchemical. This would just be another way of reducing all of the universe to one principle, so you could have a solvent to transform or rearrange reality based on your own relativistic principles. It's alchemical the same way Newton was influenced by alchemy. This is a nonsense idea that might only have some truth in it, but is essentially ambivalent, and was not arrived at by actual empirical experimentation, as far as I can see. Empiricism is not the foundation for knowledge, but physics is serious insofar as it involves empirical work. When you get into theoretical physics, is that even a real thing? Because how can you have physics without experimentation?
Somehow send lots of super bright lights a light year away to surround the Earth and briefly blink them, what would happen is that the light pulse would take a year to get to the Earth, and they'd arrive at the same time. When we saw them, we'd be seeing a blink that was a year old from objects located a light year away. We can take this idea to the extreme and ask, what is the oldest thing in the universe?
We're looking into the past. This is an astounding idea. It's a completely magical concept. Again, maybe it's true, but this is against our common sense in some regards. Maybe I'm capitalizing common sense. Everyone might claim common sense. But just like quantum physics doesn't make sense and kind of embraces that, when you get into this level of what they call physics, they're not trying to be strictly rational either, and they think that they can get away with it because there has to be some other explanation that can justify it. So just grant them these assumptions. You don't need to grant them these assumptions. They need all of their assumptions in order to sell you this story.
And that is, by definition, the moment the universe began. That happened 13.8.
What is the universe? What is it? Again, it's just this empty void. How is a void even a thing? Empty nothingness? But there's something in the nothing. So it's this relation between points in this nothing, otherwise nothingness. Where are the boundaries of this thing? How did this thing come to be? Well, they have different explanations as to, it's expanding, or maybe it's not expanding, maybe it's contracting, but not this. We don't really know what the boundary of this thing really is. This is when they get into, we're studying deep space and blue light and red light, and whether it's moving away from you, and you're inferring sizes of objects on such vast scales that it's almost silly to entertain this. Not that we can dismiss the ultimate reality one way or the other of these things, but just to think that you could deduce, or is it induce or deduce? But if you could come to reasonable conclusions about the nature of objects, which are worlds, like what you claim in your own worldview to be literal physical worlds away from you by magnitude of orders that would make would be on the level of a supercomputer, at least. Not in the framework of a human mind. Again, that's not to say that it couldn't be real, but it is the question: how can you conclude these things with any certainty? What kind of presuppositions must you have, in other words, to be able to talk of the universe this way, if the universe is even what they say it is?
13.8 billion years ago. If the universe wasn't expanding,
on the scale of billions, when all of human history that we can reasonably say to have some understanding of doesn't go back more than a few thousand years. That's the limitation of our experience. I'm not necessarily saying, the Earth is only such and such number of years old. I'm not trying to go there, but in our reasonable experience, there have only been so many civilizations that we know about, and beyond that, they say there were ice ages, and even at that level, they say there were ice ages. We can see old, skeletons of animals that were there, and some evidence of geology produced by shifting ice. Yes, but really beyond some conception of a flood or an ice age, some thousands of years ago, but not too long ago. Beyond that, we just don't really know. There's all sorts of interesting paths we can take to reason, and to look at sediments, and to look at boulders around the world, and look at asteroid impacts, and reason based on the stars, and reason about all these things. They're all just, you're just caught up in the physical world, when really these answers are not ever going to be with certainty brought to you apart from something like revelation, or apart from the fact that this is there's a metaphysical reality here that we're part of, that transcends the physical world. So no matter how much a geologist tries to explain the exact age of the Earth, for example, or the exact presence of certain species on the Earth at certain times, and how species relate to one another, to really do that with certainty is never going to be achievable within the framework of looking at physical material on the Earth alone. We're just limited in that fashion. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but what we should recognize the limitations, depending, or at least be honest with our worldview. If we have a different worldview, then affirm your presuppositions based on faith, because we all have to have some faith in our worldview to some extent.
Farthest thing we would see would be a sphere centered on the Earth with a radius of 13.8 billion light years. This is what we call the visible universe. Inside that sphere, light has had time to get to us. Outside the sphere, it hasn't. We can't see anything outside that sphere. Now I should caution you and point out that the numbers quoted for the visible universe are true only if the universe isn't expanding. Of course, it is expanding, so the situation is a little more complicated.
Of course, it is expanding. Okay, so I just grant him that assumption. No, I understand. He doesn't have to explain every assumption here, because this is just a single topic video. He's not trying to present the whole coherent worldview here. But a lot of the time, these people will just say these things because they're established. When really, a lot of these things get accepted. Maybe you could say a majority of scientists in major institutions accept these things. And really, it's on the scale of decades. And then decades go by, and then they start to change, and they start to shift, and sooner or later, major fundamental things are brought into question again. Even looking at our own history, this is something we can see in history.
I made a video about how that changes things, and you might even want to take a look at it. But the bottom line is that there is a sphere centered on the Earth that is the extent of the visible universe.
Inadvertently, regardless about what you think of the Earth being round or flat, but you could kind of read a geocentric worldview into this, because he's acknowledging, look, this is what we see, and the Earth is at the center of that. We just think that Earth's not really the center of the universe. There must be all these other worlds out there with all these other civilizations that could destabilize any sort of idea of what fundamental metaphysics and logic, and even though these things must exist like they must be universal necessarily, but it feeds into this idea that we might not have that grounding in values and basic truths in how we look at the world. What is a man and what is a woman? What does it mean to be human? What is the good? All these things. If you have this endless worlds or there's endless beings, then it kind of serves to undermine the certainty that there are these universal truths, which of course there are. I mean, I believe this is all deception, but it could feed into that idea. But of course, if we're being honest, the first thing we're confronted with is that the earth is all we know and all we ever will personally know, at least in this life.
Is that how big the entire universe is? The answer to that question is almost certainly no. The universe is bigger than we can currently see right now. And you kind of already knew that. For instance, as we look out and see the light from the beginning of the universe today, we can see out to some distance. If we look again tomorrow, we will be able to see out to that distance plus an additional light day. That's because light traveling over the course of those 24 hours will be just getting here tomorrow. And inexorably, day after day, we'll be able to see a larger and larger sphere of the universe. There are locations that we cannot see today because the light simply hasn't had time to get to us that we'll be able to see tomorrow. Again, this ignores the complications due to the expansions of the universe. We'll get to that in a minute.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say the time, what they're saying about time is, as far as I understand it, if we were not moving here on Earth, and then something, what they claim is thousands or millions of light years away, it's the speed of the light. So that could infer that maybe both points are supposed to be still. But of course, what's holding the universe together? Nothing, essentially. Things could be moving and they say are caught up in gravitational fields and are moving kind of like water in an ocean. So then how do you even relate in a steady fashion between 2 points? Because that would affect how long it takes the light from one object to reach the other object. If both are moving, then it becomes even more difficult to say anything absolute about how old these strange lights in the sky are. These beautiful lights, the heavens. But can we say with certainty what those actually are in the heavens and how old they are? So at this point I was ready to end the video. I skipped a few minutes here. There's one more thing he says which is pretty ridiculous.
So you'd think that when we looked out with our telescopes, we'd see a glow about like what looks like when you see inside a steel mill. But this is where the expansion of space comes in. Since that moment, the universe has been expanding and cooling and even stretching space.
The universe has been expanding and stretching and cooling and expanding and stretching space. How can you stretch something which is a void? Can I stretch? Can I stretch the air? It's not even the air. Like whatever is in front of me, right? Can I take that and stretch that? No. It's just there's nothing there.
The upshot of that is that what once would have been viewed by the human eye as white is now no longer visible and can be only seen by radio antenna capable of detecting microwaves. For that reason, this oldest thing that we can actually see is called the cosmic microwave background, or CMB, and the temperature of the universe in the current day is now 2.7 Kelvin, or minus 207.
Again, and just with finitude, we can say what the temperature of the early universe was by interpreting frequencies of light which come out in blue and red, and we relate to temperature, which maybe in some fashion does relate to temperature, but therefore we think this is enough to validate how far or old the universe is. Well, this is all just getting very boring, and it just is completely uninspiring, and it doesn't seem rational how one thing follows to the other. It doesn't seem to add up. All the conclusions or the assumptions they take for granted, it's all resting on many, many other series of assumptions which could fall apart easily if one of them is removed. Hasta luego, amigos.